You don't want to miss Beyond HR Forum, being held June 11th and 12th, 2020 in Amsterdam, where you will meet inspiring, forward-looking, and impactful leaders in human resources. Once again, the team at Beyond has selected a great venue, the historic Kramhouthal. It reflects their values of designing a unique space and atmosphere that brings forth intimacy, collaboration, inspiration, and partnership with HR thought leaders from leading companies around the world. The forum moves beyond the current HR to guide you along a journey that progressive leaders in HR are invited to embark upon. Join remarkable guests as they share their insights on how to make humanity the ultimate value to organizations, societies, and the world. This is more than just an event. It's a one-of-a-kind opportunity to inspire your thinking to go beyond and reach the unreachable. For more information and to register, please visit www.beyondhrforum.com. Hi, welcome back to another episode of The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, and with me today, all the way from, if you can believe it, sunny London, is Lucy Adams. Lucy is the CEO of Disruptive HR and the ex-HR director of the BBC. We all know the BBC. Lucy created Disruptive HR after having held several senior HR roles in many sectors in England. And she had grown frustrated with the lack of innovation and fresh thinking in the profession and wanted to find new ways of tackling very old problems. And right now she runs this agency, which helps human resource directors and business leaders do things better. She's the author of two books. One is HR Disrupted, and the other is the HR Change Toolkit. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lauren. How are you doing?
I'm great. And I got to tell you, in talking to you about what we're going to talk about, I actually got so excited and so energized. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic.
So we're going to talk about kind of the change that's going on in HR, and you're excited about the change. I think maybe some people who are listening will be like, what change? So let's first talk about kind of, real quickly, what has not been working in HR and where did that all kind of come about?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know exactly where it came from. I think it comes from a number of places. I think, firstly, we have tried really hard to build our credibility as a profession by kind of emulating finance. So we've tried to look at streamlined processes and cost effectiveness and return on investment. We've tried really hard to be an efficient service provider. We've looked at, kind of moving away from serving employees to doing what business leaders want. And it's hard, right? Doing HR is a really hard gig. It's not an easy gig. However, I think that we have over the years forgotten what our core role ought to be, which in my view is about creating the conditions where our people can thrive. And instead, we focused on the things that have led us down a route of the kind of nursemaid of the organization, but also the compliance officer of the organization.
That's really funny because those are like two distinct, like being a nursemaid and being the compliance person are like two polar opposites.
Well, they are and they're not. So on the one hand, you've clearly got, the desire to help and serve. And then you've also got the kind of, rule maker, rule follower, rule implementer. But both of them are parenting. Both of them in their way have an assumption that we don't deal with grown-ups, that they're either incapable, our employees and leaders, of using their own judgment, so we have to do it for them, or they're actually incapable of behaving in a decent way. So we've got to put in place these rules and processes to make them behave well. So whilst they manifest themselves in different ways, at their heart is this parenting. And I think HR has taken this role of parenting to a real extreme.
Wow, that's really interesting that you've kind of distilled it down into the archetype of parent.
Yeah, and I think one of the exciting things that I'm seeing is a recognition that this parenting has actually created a rod for our own back. It hasn't created the leaders and the employees who can cope with a disrupted world and all the stuff we want with that, right? We want them to take risks, embrace change, be more agile, challenge more, speak up, be more responsive. Actually, what we've done is we've created a compliant but very passive environment. And so I think that we have seen the emergence of this more adult to adult approach, which is scary and time consuming and all of that stuff. Any change is hard, we know, but actually can reap real rewards if they get it right.
Yeah, it's funny because I just kind of bookending what you're talking about, that it's not even like healthy parenting where you have a parent that wants the child to take a risk. It's almost kind of like a helicopter, over-concerned, neurotic parent who doesn't trust their kids to do the right thing and is constantly like pulling on the strings to pull them back.
Exactly, because I use the example when I'm talking to HR professionals of, as a parent, you clearly, if you've got a kid that's learning to ride a bike and they've got these stabilizer wheels, these safety wheels on the back, then obviously you don't just whip those away and kind of push them off and go, right, see you. That would be cruel and negligent. But neither do you keep them on there until they're in their 30s. And I think that's actually what we've done. We've kept these stabilizer wheels around there because there is this deep-rooted concern. And a lot of it comes from the fact we just don't trust managers to manage. And so much of what we've done are one-size-fits-all processes, the processes that we believed are best practice, everything from performance evaluation process to talent management process to engagement processes. All of these processes at their heart have a lack of faith in managers and a belief that actually we've got to kind of cater to this lowest common denominator and somehow protect our employees from these bad managers rather than perhaps almost kind of exposing and acknowledging that these bad managers are probably never going to change.
Right. And they could actually, the bad managers could also be a product of this parenting style of HR.
Completely. So, we see, and I obviously work with leaders as well as HR folk, and I've worked with leaders all my life in as an HR professional, and if you treat people like kids, if you do both the caring side and you do the compliance side, then you tend to get a kind of childlike behavior in response. You get the sulky behavior, you get the sense of, well, why should I bother? You're pushing processes onto them as leaders that they don't acknowledge are actually going to give any real value to their business, to their employees, but we make them do it. And so actually they do push back, a lot of them. They do get frustrated. And we see that as further evidence that they can't be trusted rather than questioning, well, actually, are we doing it in the right way in the first place?
I think anyone who's listening, even if you're not in HR, would agree with what you're saying. So what have you discovered and what's working? Because you're excited and I'm ready for a little optimism.
So yeah, what I'm seeing is firstly an acknowledgement, and I think we do have to start with that acknowledgement that what we've been doing for the last 20, 30, 40 years, these kind of best practices that we're schooled in kind of HR school, that actually they are no longer relevant. Maybe they were never relevant, but they're certainly not relevant today. And with the way that business is changing so fast, new expectations in the workplace, you name it, you can list all those macro trends. But what we're seeing is firstly a genuine acknowledgement that maybe it isn't working. So that's exciting. That's quite exciting. Maybe it's not working.
Which is like the first step to you need help. Acknowledging that there's a breakdown.
Anybody who's familiar with kind of 12-step programs or addiction, first step is you acknowledge that you have a problem. That's a kind of big deal, really, for people to actually
totally.
Yeah. Because if you've been doing it the same way for 20 years, to say, maybe this never worked. But we're seeing that acknowledgement. Secondly, we are seeing the emergence of some real innovative practice, whether it's about moving away from this parenting to creating much more employee-owned, employee-led approaches to, say, performance management like we see in Adobe, or learning like we see at Sky. We're also seeing, though, and this is an area that I'm really excited about, is this idea of the consumerization of the workplace and HR. So this acknowledgement that one size fits all cannot be a good thing. So as an HR professional, I look back and I question, why was I proud that I had a universal process for everything? Because on some level, I thought that that was a good, efficient thing to do as a professional leader. Whereas actually, if you look at the way that marketing deal with their consumers, then they wouldn't dream of going with one product, one route to market, one set of messaging. They understand their consumer base, and they recognize that there is a need to provide different choices, different options. So we're seeing this consumerization, whether it's through things like employee personas, which is clearly stolen from consumer personas in marketing.
Wait. What's a employee persona?
So if you're familiar with marketing, so what marketing teams will do, particularly in B2C marketing, so rather than B2B, but B2C marketing, what they'll do is they'll look at the demographics of their target market, and they will begin to cluster those individuals around types or personas. So these aren't real people. They are fictional people, but what you do is you understand their drivers, their motivations. You create, based on sort of a base demographic insight, you create these personas. So instead of then thinking about what do we need to do as an HR profession, you're thinking, what do our end users in our organization need, want, like, prefer, will respond to? And so we see it in the example of things like reward. So instead of a standard bonus scheme, we're seeing increasingly a move to saying, you know what, if we're going to surprise and delight people with our reward and recognition packages, it's got to be something they actually care about. So we have organizations like Baptist Healthcare, where they will ask people when they join, what is it that matters to you in terms of financial and non-financial recognition? So for you, Lorne, it might be that what you really want is you've got, kids costing you a fortune, you need lots of cash. Whereas I, with grown-up kids, might actually just appreciate some time off because I want to travel a bit more. I've got my, mom I want to care for. So what is it that really we care about? And so we're seeing it in the areas of reward. We're seeing this consumerization in areas around learning and development. So what makes you want to learn something? How do you learn best? May be very different to me. You might actually really appreciate social learning, interaction, whereas I might actually like to learn by taking myself away and watching some videos, listening to some podcasts, reflect. So it's about tailoring and the consumerization of the workplace based around what are our drivers, what are our needs, what are our preferences, rather than one size fits all.
And so let's talk about that. So it's interesting you say that, because I've heard that people are kind of thinking about employees as customers.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a new idea. Why is that important?
Well, if you think about what we do for if we're trying to think about, again, the marketing role and what they do with customers, they're trying to change perceptions, change behaviors, increase brand loyalty. Well, isn't that what we're trying to do in HR? Change perceptions, change behaviors, increase brand loyalty. So we have a lot of parallels with marketing and consumer insights, behaviors, so we can learn a lot from them. When we talk about employees as customers, I think sometimes people think, oh, well, that's about great service. I think it's absolutely not just about great service. I think it's about really getting under the skin of who your employees are. What do they need? What do they want? What are their drivers? What are their triggers? What are they frightened of? And then customizing and tailoring what you do to ensure that it has more impact and is more relevant.
And do you think that in a lot of ways it's coming from the value that employees have to employers more so now?
Possibly. I think it's also a recognition, though, that with automation, we can provide a level of choice that perhaps we weren't able to. And also because in our human lives outside of work, we expect a level of personalization like never before. If you think about the way that you can, structure your own newspaper based on your own choices of the kind of articles that you want to read, we expect a level of personalization in our human lives, which automation, data insight, algorithms has made possible. And yet when we go into work, we kind of have to go back 20 years where it's one size fits all. So I think it is about changing expectations of employees, and possibly this, the so-called war for talent that we've wrestled with for sort of 20 years. But I think it's also because in our human lives, we now have the ability to be treated almost like an individual. You think about what Amazon knows about you and how they'll tailor the recommended offers for you. They don't always get it right. You often get recommended to buy the product that you've just bought. But on the whole, they are all the time gathering data and insights about you so that they can ensure that what they send to you is more impactful and relevant. And that's what we need to be doing in the workplace.
Right. So the why, maybe not that important, but that it's happening.
Yeah, it's happening.
And it's exciting that it's happening.
It's very exciting because I think whilst we see, of course, there's always been the ability for me to go and take my services to another employer, we're also seeing a range of employment choices. So I don't necessarily have to be a full-time employee. I can, have my own business. I can go freelance. So I think we're seeing individuals having a wider range of choice, not just necessarily within traditional employment. And that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing because it's making HR professionals recognize that the standard approach that they've taken from talent attraction through to exit interview isn't necessarily going to cut it.
Right. I mean, I like to think, and I guess maybe this is my youthful optimism, that for business reasons, people have become more valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's always that kind of sense of the sword of Damocles hanging over us that actually we're all going to be turned into, jobs will all be turned into automated robots and we won't be needed. And yet the evidence seems to suggest that, there are some parts of our jobs that are disappearing, but actually the judgment, the emotional intelligence piece, the interaction and use of automation seems to be the way that it's going rather than wholesale jobs disappearing, obviously with the exception of certain areas of the kind of more transactional piece.
Do you have any thoughts on automation, or is that something that you want to leave for another conversation since you brought it up?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I have probably ill-informed opinions on almost anything. I have an opinion on that. I think in relation to HR, I think it's very important that if we're going to start getting involved with automation, particularly in the areas of, say, recruitment, learning, and so on, I think we have to be involved much earlier in its development. I hear a lot of HR people saying, "Oh, I'm not tech savvy. I don't understand that stuff." But actually, if we're going to ensure that our end user experience is superb for our employees, if we're going to ensure that subconscious bias is taken out and ensure that that doesn't factor in the systems automation that we're using, we're going to have to get tech savvy.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the specific things that you're seeing in the field? I'd love if you could give some examples that our listeners could say, okay, yeah, I can start practicing that at work, that have been working, that have brought a level of humanity into the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think that point is a really good one, that humanity piece, because one of the things that I think is very energizing is that we can make changes and they don't actually have to mean huge amounts more work. Instead, if we start from the point of view that a lot of our processes bear no relevance to how human beings think, feel, behave, are intrinsically motivated, communicate, learn, and so on, but are instead designed around poor managers, then by taking a step back, we can change them with almost very little cost or no cost. And instead of adding to our action list, because every HR person I ever meet is exhausted and has got an action list as long as my arm, but instead we can change things by stripping back. So let's have a look at an example, which I think everybody is either is looking at or has looked at or is wanting to do something about. An area that has not worked is probably one of the most heinous crimes that is committed by HR, and that is the area of performance evaluations.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Can I just share something? I wanted to just share something. I read this woman's book, Patty Flanagan, and she wrote a book on how women can kind of break through the glass ceiling. But in it, there was a story about a woman giving feedback to one of her subordinates, and she gave the person a very low score. And the technology in this performance review software said, hey, manager, remember this person was on maternity leave and you usually give them a higher score. Are you sure that's what you want to do? And in fact, the manager said, no, you're right. And so the technology actually helped them pause and make a more correct assessment of their performance.
That's really interesting because I think we'll come back to the ratings because actually it's a complete, and I think a completely wrong assumption that ratings can ever be accurate, but or indeed add value to performance. But leaving that aside, I think that's a really interesting point of where you are using technology to help the human be more effective, because what we've focused on is things like our unconscious bias, and we have unconscious bias training. Well, just making us more aware of our unconscious bias doesn't mean to say we can do anything about it. So instead, you're almost taking the human out of the process, or at least building in a check and balance for the human being, which I think is really clever. So I like that idea if it wasn't about ratings. So back to the ratings piece. Yeah, there's a classic example of what we actually wanted was something very human. We wanted two human beings to have a conversation, whereas you, as my manager, can help me do something a bit better next week than I'm doing today. That's a very human, small thing. And yet, because we didn't trust you as my manager to do that, what we've done is to put a huge amount of structure and process, and now we're further away than ever from the conversation. So what we're seeing is this dismantling of these systems, the moving away from the idea that one conversation a year is actually going to help me, and instead replacing it with frequent check-ins, undocumented, where we just have a quick conversation by the water cooler.
Whoa. You said something, so frequent conversations, which takes time. Right? So people say, like, I don't have time. And then undocumented, well, HR is going to be like, well, what do you mean? You're going to talk to people and not write something down?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's heresy.
Yeah, it is. But if you think about it, why do we write it down? So it might be that I, as your employee,
because a lawyer told us to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where we're doing nursemaid and compliance officer again. So what we're doing is designing a system around the 2 or 3% of people that might behave badly in our organization in a year to get to the 97% of people, but apply it to the 97% of people who aren't. That's crazy. That's insane.
Do you have in England, do you have something akin to the Title VII, basically, do you have rules in place that protect classes of people? And
absolutely. Yeah. So and the thing is I'm not saying if you've got somebody that is behaving badly that you think on some level you're going to have to move them out of the organization at some point, document the hell out of it. But you don't need to do it for a conversation which you and I might have, where you might say to me, Lucy, what are you working on this week and how can I help? Now, is that going to take a huge amount of time? I don't think so. What we're doing to managers at the moment is once or twice a year, we make them go through this crazy exercise where they have to fill out paperwork, book a meeting room, sit with me for an hour and a half. Actually, is that not just something that you could practice? What are you working on and how can I help? And we could factor that into our day. So that's what we're seeing.
So who has done this, and can you point to a specific application of that one, just that one?
Yeah, so that using that question, I'm not sure whether they'd be delighted about me using their names, but I've seen this working in financial services, in professional services, in retail, in public sector, and even with a company that I was with last week, are moving to it where they're getting rid of the ratings, they're getting rid of the documentation, they're instead moving to something which is about focusing on helping managers get a little bit better at that coaching conversation, but doing it within the day rather than seeing it as something extra that they have to do. And that was a big engineering company. So
now I'm just curious. I get that, you want to be protective of folks. Can I ask why you wouldn't want to say who the company was? Not to say who the company is, but I'm just curious, what about that has you skittish?
Because I didn't check with them in advance. I think if they're organizations that I've worked with, I feel that it would be a courtesy before I kind of use their name. If I've just read about it, then it's not a problem because that's public and on the web. So we could talk about Accenture. They published.
Well, wait. No, I brought it up because I think you make a really good point, is that often we don't want to say things because it's respectful just to ask permission.
Yeah.
Right. That it's not counter to an openness and a willingness to treat people like adults, but it's also about being respectful of everyone's particular feelings about their information.
Yeah, exactly. And also, these people these companies that are moving away from traditional processes are being brave and are maybe in the early stages where they're trying it out. And there's a risk, isn't there, that if you celebrate it as a success rather than people that are just trying new things, that there are always going to be some people in the organization that say, oh, yeah, but it doesn't work. And the reality is that David Rock, who is a guy that I like very much, and he heads up the Neuro Leadership Institute. And what he's been doing is tracking Fortune 500 companies that have moved away from traditional approaches to performance management and instead of, drop the ratings, moving to more frequent conversations. And his research suggests that the vast majority say that this helps us have better conversations, it improves performance, it increases motivation and engagement, and they would never go back. And that's what we were trying to do, wasn't it? On a human level, was increase performance, motivation, productivity, not to get a process that worked well, but actually to help me as your employee do something better next week.
Yeah, and I think just about any employee would agree with you that, we want to do a good job. We want to do well. We just need context that actually supports it. And I think you're pointing out one. I think that's great that you talked about the neuroscience leadership. And that was Jacques Gray, right?
So this was David Rock that I quoted.
Oh, David Rock. Okay, because I think we're going to interview Jacques Gray, but I'd love to talk to David Rock. Are you going to be going to Beyond?
No, I'm not. I'm away. I'm trying to think where I am, but I'm definitely not around, unfortunately.
Oh, well, that's too bad. Well, at least the folks that are going will be able to hear this conversation.
Great.
Lucy, how can they find out more about you? I know that you've got a bunch of videos on the internet. Is there a way that people can reach out to you?
Yeah, so they can contact me via, obviously, the LinkedIn stuff, but they've got our website. There's a whole load of free blogs, free resources, diagnostic tools, etc. And they can contact us via that if they want to. And that's www.disruptivehr.com.
Cool. And any parting thoughts for the audience about where things are going or what they should be doing to take on the next level of HR? Get us out of the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we tend to want to have proof that it's going to work. And, I think that's an unfortunate risk aversion that has held our profession back. And I can understand why we kind of want to prove to our leaders that it's going to work. But the reality is that we need to try some new stuff, and some of it won't. And some of it, in fact, shouldn't work because it needs to fail, because otherwise it's not pioneering. And I think we need to get ourselves into a place where we are using agile product design, trying things, failing fast, failing safe. But for God's sake, try something.
Oh my goodness, that you just opened up like a whole new topic on failing, that companies don't want to fail. And so when there's a little bit of a failure, like particularly in HR, they just throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Completely. And I think, when I was really guilty of this. If I was going to roll out something new, I would have, squared away the unions, squared away the PR team, the legal team. I would have got scripts written, cascaded through every manager. I'd have my frequently asked questions. We put all this effort in. And actually what we need is a much more, we can borrow and learn from agile product methodology, product design, and instead, looking at minimum viable product, looking at short sprints, it can really apply to us, and I think could make us much more responsive, much more credible, and could be much more fun in HR.
Wow. Wow. And on that, because my goodness, we could probably talk for another couple of hours. On that, I'm going to let you go and have the rest of your beautiful day in London.
Thanks.
And Lucy, thank you so much. And did you give out your email address? I know that you have a Twitter account. Did you want to do that? I know that your Twitter is Lucy4Adams.
Well, so instead of the A, it's a 4.
Right. Cool. Lucy4Adams. Oh, it's Lucy4Dams. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
so,
that's it.
Thank you. I'm wearing my glasses not well.
Yeah, no, don't worry. It's fine. Twitter handles are so difficult, aren't they? But yeah, my email is lucy@disruptivehr.com if anyone wants to reach out.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure chatting to you. Have a great day.
Absolutely. And you've been listening to The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, and we'd love to see you at the Beyond Conference in June of 2020.
Thanks, Lauren.
You don't want to miss Beyond HR Forum, being held June 11th and 12th, 2020 in Amsterdam, where you will meet inspiring, forward-looking, and impactful leaders in human resources. Once again, the team at Beyond has selected a great venue, the historic Kramhouthal. It reflects their values of designing a unique space and atmosphere that brings forth intimacy, collaboration, inspiration, and partnership with HR thought leaders from leading companies around the world. The forum moves beyond the current HR to guide you along a journey that progressive leaders in HR are invited to embark upon. Join remarkable guests as they share their insights on how to make humanity the ultimate value to organizations, societies, and the world. This is more than just an event. It's a one-of-a-kind opportunity to inspire your thinking to go beyond and reach the unreachable. For more information and to register, please visit www.beyondhrforum.com. If you want to sell more to HR and TA professionals, we can help you bring your brand into the ears of over 100,000 decision makers around the world. To advertise on this and other shows, contact us at lauren@laurenepstein.com.